Hi, everyone. We'll get started today. So, welcome to Finding Your Voice in the Interview, Communicating Confidently Through Change. Please note that this session will be offered in English. So, I am joining you today from Mi'kma'ki, which is also known as Halifax. And I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship. And I would encourage all of you to acknowledge the land that you're on as well. So as we move through today's session, please share your questions by using the Q&A button in the language of your choice. You can vote for your questions that you like by clicking on the thumbs up button. So this session will be recorded and published to the Fin YouTube channel. So you can go back to check out for the recordings and the insights at a later date. So we would like to note that the PowerPoint presentation for each session are included on our wiki page, so you can feel free to follow along at your own pace and to improve your learning experience. Additionally, all the resources shared during this session will be added to our wiki page under resources. So my name is Sarah Robichaud, and I will be your moderator for this session. I currently work for Health Canada in Human Resources, and I'm also a co-chair for the Nova Scotia Federal Youth Network, so also known as NSFIN. So before we get started, we have a couple of quick polling questions. So this is not mandatory, however, your participation is encouraged. So we'll start with the first question, which is, has your position been affected as a result of fiscal restraints? So the options are, yes, my term is ending, yes, my position was workforce adjusted, no, and I don't know. And for the second question, what do you find most challenging about interviews right now? So knowing how to structure my answers, communicating my impact clearly, managing nerves during the interview, and preparing examples in advance that connects my experience to the role. So I'll just give you a few seconds to get your answers in. Okay, so it looks like the results are in. So by the looks of it, for the first question, about 52% said no, they have not been affected. And about 31 said yes, that they were workforce adjusted. And so for the second question, the most challenging right now would be, it's actually about 34 and 34, so half and half, communicating at my impact clearly and preparing examples in advance. Okay, so we're going to move on to the objectives for today. So we're going to first start with translate your career story into structured, compelling interview responses. We'll then move on to use the STAR method to clearly communicate skills and measurable impact. That will be followed by connect past accomplishments to the future value that you can bring to a new role. We will then learn how to apply practical techniques to communicate confidently under pressure. And then finally, we're going to leave you with a simple, repeatable preparation plan. And then on with that, I would like to introduce Joshua Frame, who's the National Chair of the Federal Youth Network, and he will provide you with your opening remarks. Over to you, Josh.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sarah. Hi, I'm Joshua Frame, National Chair of the Federal Youth Network. I am joining you from Victoria, the traditional unceded territory of the Songhees, Saanich, and Esquimalt nations, and proud to be joining you from this territory. So I started my career way back in 2009, so it seems like quite a while ago. But over my career, I've had lots of different roles and entered a management stream in 2012, so pretty early on in my career. But I was workforce adjusted back in 2015 while on a talent plan, and really that helped to kind of shape the future of my career. So for those of you who are in a workforce adjustment position, what I would say is take some time to reflect and see where you want to go from here. It is a sort of chance to revisit your career path. And there's the survival aspect of it, of finding a new position or competing in a selection and retention process. But there's also a reflection aspect of kind of figuring out, what your path can be in the future. For me, I ended up changing my career path entirely to focus on learning and development of employees, and I when I look back, I can't even imagine if I had taken a different decision, what that path would be. Okay, next slide, please. So in terms of finding your voice in the interview, job interviews definitely, especially at a time of workforce adjustment, can feel high stakes. You're competing against other people. You're trying to find a new position. If you're in a term role, you're trying to get that term position that's available, and those are less plentiful than they were before. It's a period of uncertainty for really everyone across the GC. And I think we saw that with our stats of 60% of you are not directly impacted by workforce adjustment at this time, but it is a time of significant change. It will be a significant time of movement as well across the GC in terms of folks moving to new departments, government priorities changing. And we know the uncertainty of the world. If you're not clear on what's uncertain in the world, turn on any news channel for about 60 seconds and you'll see a diversity of stories going on and different priorities. But interviews are an opportunity really to find potentially a new exciting role, or at the very least to practice your preparation and your skills. So even an unsuccessful interview can be positive in terms of guiding you towards success in a future interview. If you think back to, okay, actually, I answered that incorrectly. I didn't provide the response I wanted to provide. Think about that after and reflect on it of like, how would you answer that next time? But it really comes down to how you can translate your experience into clear, compelling responses. So we have an amazing group of panelists who will take you through that today. And we will start off by handing it over to Jeremy Tate, who will be speaking to the first part of preparing with purpose. So Jeremy, over to you.
Thank you so much, Joshua. So yes, so excited to be here. Happy to be a part of these types of activities. I have 25 years in the public service. I feel like I'm still a student and still curious about all the changes to come because when I started 25 years ago, I loved that the government was a place where I could make a difference, no matter how big or small. And part of those challenges come from rapid change that does happen every 5 years. I'm from BC. I'm Nishka. I've held several roles over my time in the federal public service. And I think that what I do best is collaborate and work with others and share my knowledge and everything I learn. So I lead with curiosity and I try to look for a way to improve the workplace so that's in a better place than when I found it. And that is a daily effort that I feel makes the biggest impact because during my journey, I'm strengthening my own competencies, but I'm helping others do the same through my everyday job and everyday work, and also things that I do off the corner of my desk to help working groups through the federal public service interdepartmentally. I try to find a way to use my talents everywhere I can, not just in my role as a finance person or a director or manager, always looking to support people. So I'll jump right into the next slide. So I've done a lot of staffing over the years for students. I've probably hired hundreds of students over my career, particularly in the last 15 years. And what I do when I onboard students for the first time is look back to my first few months on the job and maybe my first competition. And one of the things that stuck out to me was there's a lot of consistency in how jobs are posted. And there's a lot of consistency in how that approach is carried out by department. So that's a great thing. There's a lot of similarities that help you kind of mentally prepare for any role. But when I hire new people coming into the federal public service, the first thing I try to do is have them think about their future, think about the role they're in now, think about what they're studying, think about their past experiences, think where they would love to be. The great thing about the federal public service is it's a huge internal labor market. So we have everybody from mailroom clerks right up to deputy ministers and everything in between with researchers, directors, program specialists. But the great thing is there's a home for everybody. So when you're looking at your career, I always encourage you to look at job posters. Even when you're not looking for your next job, you're looking at job posters for your competencies. You're looking at job posters for those roles that might fit your skill set. And that research is really important. So it's really critical that you think about where you think you fit in the federal public service and doing that research strategically up front, allowing yourself some time to think about what experience is required, say, for the next level in your cadre. Maybe you're in the Sierra category or the PM category, the AS category. Always look for those positions that you want to target. And then having conversations during your performance management agreement with your team leader, manager, director, to think about how do you get those skills. So all this research upfront is more about your best fit. Where do you see yourself? And we have lots of time to think about these things, but a lot of times people wait until that perfect job becomes available. So it's always critical to do the research, take some time to do the research on various levels, different jobs, and see where you need to strengthen your skills. And then start thinking about what you already have, take inventory, take note of all the experiences you do have that could fit those experiences, but then where do you need to go to get the experience you don't have? And this is again getting into having structured conversations, as interviews are not conversations, they're literally you demonstrating your competencies for the board. So I'll pass it on to the next slide. So when you're looking at job posting, you're looking for themes, and a lot of the themes fall into the key leadership category. So it's mobilizing people, it's innovation, it's conflict resolution. It's looking at those particular questions or experiences that the board is seeking and finding ways to link them to the defined key leadership competencies. Again, the great thing about government is it's very transparent with how it runs the processes. What changes is just the stories that you curate to match your transferable skills to those roles. And I find the upfront work to do this is a little bit heavy, but as time goes on, you'll start to realize that your stories are part of you, and all of those things that you bring to the table are unique to you. So when you journalize your past experiences for future opportunities, it's always putting it into the key leadership competencies of creating vision and strategy, mobilizing people, upholding integrity and respect, collaborating with partners and stakeholders, and promoting innovation and change, and achieving results. So these are all the key leadership competencies. They do have definitions. I encourage you to analyze them online. It's a great way to kind of formulate your answers and to think about what are those technical things that you bring to any role that you've taken, either personal or professional, and trying to look at maybe 5 to 7 examples with really strong outcomes for each of those particular competencies, because that'll only help you better when you tell your story in a more authentic, genuine way. Next slide, please. So as we get into the era of AI, a lot of people probably don't see it as a good thing, and some people do. But AI is no different than when we were using calculators in school. You know, they said you'll never have a calculator in your pocket everywhere you go. Well, guess what? We have supercomputers in our pocket, even now. So with AI, so AI is a collaborative partner, and using that as a tool in your toolbox to kind of help you narrate stories. Maybe you're looking at some of the experiences that you've gained and you don't know how to map them to the competencies or job posters. You know, collaborating with AI and sharing what you think you could bring to the table, and having AI kind of self-criticize, help you criticize, better understand what your competencies are. I find AI has a better way of uniquely finding your blind spots and helping you shine light on those areas that you might be diminishing because you find they're not complex behaviors, or you find that the skills are not what you think they are. But when you start to compare with a collaborator like AI, you have the opportunity to self-criticize and to improve your responses, organize your thoughts, think about structured interviews. You can practice, you know, say, I'm going to tell this story, you tell the story, you have AI criticize it and reframe it for you. But it's a great way to kind of get out of your own head. I know when I was growing up, going through competitions, I felt like I was on my own. But when you're looking at AI, you can give it kind of your stories and kind of give it something that it can latch onto. And the main thing when you're doing interviews is that you're always giving the board an opportunity to latch onto something in your experience that demonstrates you have a competency. And competency comes from grit. It comes from your ability to navigate difficult situations. It comes from your ability to negotiate with people that might not think the same as you. That's where the diversity and inclusion comes in. But it's really critical to demonstrate to a board that when you do something, it may seem easy to you, but you do have to reveal the complex reality of working in the Canada Federal Public Service. I've always said interpersonal behaviors is the most critical tool we have in our toolbox. And the more you hone that skill, overall, you'll be able to demonstrate to any board that you have the grit, you have the ability, and you've demonstrated competency. Because as time goes on, things do get easier, but you do have to journalize and say out loud the difficult things that you may find easy now, but at the point you were doing it, you were learning it, it was difficult. And that's what competency demonstration looks like to a board. So always give them something to latch on to and say, you've done this thing, this is the outcome. It was either successful or not. And this is what I learned from it. This is what I would do differently. But that's the cycle of learning. So just keep that in mind as you're starting to prepare your answers and thinking about how you can use AI for that perspective. Next slide. And panel interviews, they're a little bit stressful, but just so you know, again, for transparency, the panel interviews typically have the hiring manager and then a few other people from the organization. This panel is here to record your answers. So when you're speaking, don't speak as fast as I am right now. Try and articulate your answers in a slow format so that your answers could be captured. And make sure that they're articulated in a way that when they're reviewed, it maps the key leadership competencies and it actually addresses the question. So take your time with these. Make sure you understand that the panel is there to record your answers. They'll often go, one by one ask a question. A lot of times they can give you prep time in advance, like maybe 30 minutes, so you can see the questions in advance to reduce a little bit of anxiety. They may do probing questions if you're down a path and they want to know more. But for the most part, they don't really do that, but there are times when it does happen. But always remember that this group is not looking to find a way to fail you. They're looking for a way to hire you. So make sure that you always make sure your answers are articulated in a way that maps those key leadership competencies and always have I in the center of it. It's difficult because we say we, because we really don't do anything alone in the public service, but try and always put you in the center of what you did, what you accomplished, what skills you brought, what was the outcome of a project. Was it successful because of something that you brought? Those are the specific types of things that the board panel is looking to record. And that's how they assess you on the matrix. And that's how they score you. So the better you get at these, I encourage you to practice, encourage you to always look at job posters and maybe talk to a colleague, friend, maybe do a mock interview with someone that's able to do this to help you. But always look for help, always be curious. It's a long process, but you'll get better as time goes on. I'll pass it over to the next speaker.
Hello, welcome everybody, and thank you so much to Jeremy for that. I loved what you were saying about curiosity, about grit, and about looking at job posters. And we're going to get a little bit more into that in a second. So I am currently a senior speechwriter at the Privy Council office. I have just over a decade of communications experience in a wide range of communications. And I really love storytelling. So that's something that I really want to focus in on is how can you tell your story in an interview in a really meaningful way? So let's head on over to our first slide of content. And I think there might also be a poll coming up, but a common interview question that you might find yourself seeing. Here we go. Here's the poll, finding your voice. So we want to know from you, do you typically follow the STAR method or something similar when responding to questions in an interview? So your options are yes, always, I didn't know that I could do that, or never. And if you're thinking to yourself, what is the STAR methodology? It is situation, task, action, and result. And I'm going to be sort of going through those as we go. So amazing. 76% of you say that you always use it. That's excellent. And then about 25% of you total are not using it. So let's get into it. When we're going into interviews, a lot of the questions that they're going to ask are going to be behavioral questions. Because when you're being evaluated for a position, the evaluator has to make sure that you check off every single thing that is in the job poster. So there are certain competencies that can be evaluated through, looking at your resume or some kind of exam that might be administered. But there are a lot of competencies, like those interpersonal ones that Jeremy was talking about, that it's really hard to evaluate those until they actually speak with you. So a lot of these are going to be those like interpersonal skills, are going to be things like collaboration and problem solving and navigating challenges, evaluating your judgment. So you want to be thinking about what are some really good stories that you have in your back pocket that you can tell in a really compelling, natural, authentic way. And that can be used to highlight these different behaviors. So for myself, I had this period at the Department of Agriculture when potatoes ruined my life. Like it was kind of terrible. But I learned a lot from this and I got a lot of really great experiences out of it. So I can adapt the story of potatoes ruining my life to demonstrate how I was able to juggle multiple priorities, to talk about my diplomacy in engaging with different teams and having to navigate sort of demands coming from the minister's office that were contrary to other direction that I was receiving. I can use it to talk about collaboration and how I worked with partners from different agencies and departments. That same experience and story has so many factors in it and is a really sort of interesting thing that I can talk about. So think about the moments in your careers that you can tell again in like an engaging, authentic way that sort of highlight your work experience and that you know can show these different interpersonal skills based on what you're asked in the interview. Because you can't prepare a response for every single possible question, but a good story can be modified and sort of told in the right way to be meaningful for that moment. So if we go to the next slide, the other kind of question you might be asked is a situational question. And this is one where STAR can be super helpful. So you want to start off by describing the situation. Keep this like nice, short, tight, include only the information that is necessary for the panel to be able to understand the context. You're going to then go on to task. So that's where you talk about what it is that you either have done or would do. And then you go into action. Action is where the real meat of it is. It's where you walk the panel through your thought process, you walk them through what specific things you would do. And then finally, R is for result. So you talk about what kind of impact your action would have. And the key thing here is that the panel can't fill in any gaps for you. So in a situation like this, you know, this sort of quintessential problem, you're working on something urgent and all of a sudden another urgent task comes in. A lot of us intuitively would think, okay, well, the first thing that I would have to do is find out what actually is the priority. Like of these two urgent tasks, which one is more important? But you can't sort of rely on the interview panel sort of making that assumption for you or making that assumption with you. Go through your thought process, explain step by step what you would do and what kind of results you would achieve from that. So moving on to our next slide, you really want to think about translating your responsibility to impact. So again, this is what Jeremy was saying, where you want to talk about what you personally did. Again, a lot of the time, you know, we talk about like my team did this or we did this, or it's, you know, either we are being humble, we want to recognize the contributions of others. The interview is a time for you to make super clear how it is that your individual work contributed to something greater than yourself. So again, think about examples that you have that you were able to really take ownership of something and make a strong impact. So one that I love to use is that I once read 12,500 pages of documents in 3 days and then wrote a report that ended up being used to brief the deputy minister and the chief of the defense staff. And it was crazy. It was absolute madness, but that's something that is so clear and tangible. And then I can talk about the impact of how that then translated into creating a communications approach for how to manage this issue and how we avoided risk and mitigated a lot of potential issues that could have come from the release of these documents. So find your examples where, again, there's something very clear that you did and also a really clear outcome. You want to be using those like strong action verbs that specifically identify your contributions. And finally, again, focusing in on how you are really demonstrating the results. So if we'll go to the last slide, again, think about like, did something change as a result of your actions? Was something improved? Did a program become more clear? Was a process changed? Did you avoid a risk? Did you help mitigate something? What are all of the ways that your work tangibly led to something being improved, being better, being able to meet that deadline that other people thought was impossible? And like Jeremy was saying, this is a space where, you know, if you're sort of workshopping through an example that you might want to use in an interview, you could write it into a tool and then ask it, like, is this clear? Like, have I demonstrated my actions? Ask the sort of generative AI tool, like, do you think that there's anything missing from this? Do you understand what impact was made from this? And if the generative AI tool is confused by what you wrote, then the panel probably will be. So you can make your prompts to find potential holes in what it is that you have prepared. And with that, we are going to pass it over to Amanda to talk about showing up with confidence. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucy. Hi, everyone. My name is Amanda Crocco. I've been in the public service for 5 years next month. And before I worked for the government, I worked for almost a decade in youth addictions, mental health, and corrections. I'm currently working as a project lead on the digital transformation team at Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada. For accessibility, I am a brown-skinned woman with brown shoulder-length, straight-ish hair and wearing a black long-sleeve top, and behind me is a blurred background. I would also like to acknowledge that I'm zooming to you today from Ottawa, the traditional unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. A quick thank you to Lucy and Jeremy for their helpful tips and tricks on more of the processes and structure of the interviews. Now we're going to close the loop and talk about how to use those skills so we can show up with confidence. All right. So the first thing I want to say to you when showing up for an interview is don't be afraid to be your authentic self. Oftentimes there's many candidates that are being interviewed. You just want to make sure that you leave a lasting positive impression and stand out to the interview panel. Many interviews now are being held virtually. So if you aren't as familiar with them or haven't had much experience doing virtual interviews, it may feel a bit uncomfortable at first. Kind of similar to like those first few minutes that you're waiting for a meeting to start with people outside of your team, and everyone kind of sits there working on other things and sitting there awkwardly on mute doing work and waiting for someone to talk. Don't do that. Just breathe, smile, say hello, try to engage in small talk if you can, while you wait for the interview to begin. To make sure your energy is being well received during a virtual interview, it's important to consider a few things you might forget about if your interview isn't in person. So one, it goes without saying really, an interview is your opportunity to make a good first impression. When you look good, you feel good. Second, be mindful of your environment. Take the meeting in a quiet, well-lit space. If you aren't using a blurred or virtual background, make sure the area behind you is clean and not distracting. Just like you normally would in person, make sure you log in maybe like 10 minutes early, just so you get a chance to test your mic, camera, change your background if you need, and just make sure you have a stable connection. Also be mindful of what you're not saying in the interview. During the interview, try your best to look at the camera rather than the screen, especially if your camera is off to the side, if you have like a separate camera instead of directly in front of you. Remember that nerves are completely normal and understandable in an interview, especially. So there are a few tips on the screen there of ways you can stay calm, cool, and collected. Number one, take your time to respond to each question with intention and care. It's okay to pause for a moment to process what the question is. Even like repeating it back within your answer and your response is a really good way to like help think of what you're going to say. This also segues into the second point there, signposting. If anyone doesn't know what that is, it's kind of like when you add a placeholder comment if you need to gather your thoughts and prepare an answer. So for example, you get asked a question, you could say, oh, that's a really great question. Just know it's okay to say this, followed by a brief pause, just as you collect your thoughts to answer the question. Last tip, don't minimize your value. Be confident in your experiences and your responses. An example of what this might sound like could be, this might not be the best example, but blah, blah, blah. Instead, say something like, a strong example that demonstrates this competency is blah, blah, blah. All right, next slide. Lauren. Great, thank you. Okay, this one's my fave. Connecting your past impact to future value in the role you're interviewing for is going to be a main goal during the interview. So you want to make sure that you connect your experiences and skill sets with the needs of the employer, organization, the team that you're interviewing for. So as someone personally who still considers herself new to the government, this particular point is something I lean heavily on. All of your experiences are both valid and valuable. And while most of my personal experiences were in nonprofit and even frontline, which are very different from the work that I'm doing now, you can always find transferable skills that make you a great candidate for a role. To connect your story and experiences to the role that you're interviewing for, consider sharing how your experiences are aligned with that role that you're applying for. And Jeremy alluded to this earlier, but one government resource that I try to use to organize my examples and thoughts is looking at the Treasury Board's key leadership competencies. If you are not a supervisor or manager, it's still a great tool to start and a great place to look because it clearly identifies behaviors that the organizations are looking for, and it honestly translates well to any role. One final tip on this one that I learned along the way from a few others that might help boost your confidence is to keep a running list of your accomplishments or like a kudos folder. So these could be thank you emails on how your role contributed to the success of a project, or key milestones that you made along the way. Taking a look at these periodically, and especially when you're going into an interview, will remind you that you're probably doing a much better job and much more than you're currently giving yourself credit for. The folks on the interview panel are ultimately just wondering whether you can help contribute to their team, whether you can help them achieve their goals. So just be sure that you give them enough examples and context that doesn't leave them wondering if you're the best person for the job. Next slide, please. All right, when the panel says, do you have any questions? This is your opportunity to interview the panel and find out more about the job. So make sure you ask meaningful questions so you can also see whether this job is a good fit for you personally as well. Curiosity can also be interpreted as confidence. And by asking thoughtful questions, you can show the panel that you're serious about the role and that it's important for you to ensure that you're aligned. I would recommend prepping 2 to 3 questions in advance. Be sure to ask something you truly want to know. This is the part of the interview that will be super powerful for those genuinely wanting to learn more about the role, the team, the work culture and style, and honestly, what a typical day looks like. Earlier, you may remember that Jeremy spoke to ways that you can use AI as a tool to help you prep for your interview. I would very much encourage you to use this tool to generate or even refine some thoughtful end of interview questions as well. Next slide, please. Before we wrap up the content portion of today's session, I just want to highlight a few small habits that sometimes show up in interviews, even among very strong candidates. The first is speaking too generally. Sometimes we might describe our work at a very high level rather than walking the panel through a specific example. You have to assume that they know nothing about you, they haven't looked at your resume, so you need to be the one to tell the story and give all of those examples clearly to them. Another common challenge is describing teamwork without explaining your role, and I know that both Lucy and Jeremy spoke to this earlier. It's also very common for candidates to forget to talk about the results or outcomes of their work, because this is very important. And some candidates also feel pressured to answer immediately and start speaking before they've had a moment to think. So remembering to take that short pause to gather your thoughts before starting to express yourself. And then the last 2, we just kind of spoke about that in my spiels, but not minimizing your experiences to otherwise weaken an otherwise strong example. And finally, when the panel asks you if you have questions, again, 1, 2, or 3 thoughtful questions prepared. Next slide. Okay, so On your screen, you will note 6 tips that you heard today from either me, Lucy, Jeremy, maybe even Josh. But if you follow these steps, you'll feel more confident, ready for your interview, and the nerves won't consume you because you know your worth. You've already identified all of the value you would add to the team, and now you know how to communicate each other's. So when you leave the session today, I encourage you to take a few minutes and start by writing down 3 things. One, this is not on the screen, an example of your experience that you are proud of and can share in an interview setting. 2, perhaps a strength you will own more confidently. And 3, one action you will take before your next interview. So maybe that's looking up some of the resources that you heard today, making a kudos folder, trying out new AI prompts, or maybe taking a peek at the key leadership competencies. So the more prep you can do and all of the things you've heard today, there's lots of takeaways. I know we threw a lot at you, but the more you know yourself, the more confident you'll be. And I will pass it back over to Sarah.
Okay, thank you for sharing your insights, Amanda. That was really great. So we have a nice quote on the screen. So confidence in interviews doesn't come from having the perfect story. It comes from understanding the value of the one that you already have. So as a quick recap of today's session, preparing is very important. It creates clarity and confidence when you take time to prepare with intention by researching the organization, structuring your responses, using tools like the STAR method that we went over today. The interview becomes much less about trying to perform and more like a thoughtful conversation about your work. So as you move forward in your own interview processes, I encourage you to take time to think about what we discussed today, some of the tips, and really practice and implement that into your own, professional career. So I think we're going to move forward to the Q&A period just because we have a little bit of time left. So we kind of want to go through that. So I just wanted to mention, as stated before, we are going to have the Q&A open and you can have the thumbs up. So we'll go through some of those questions there. And okay, so we have a number of questions coming up. So I'll just take a look. Okay, so we've got some top rated ones. I'll start with the first. So I don't know if there's a panelist that kind of wants to jump in first, or we can kind of go one by one, but I'll start with the first question. So what should I do if I don't have a strong example for a competency that they're asking about?
Sure, maybe I can start off. So I think you can take a hypothetical approach and say, I don't have a specific example, but if I were in that situation, here's how I would handle it, and walk them through your thought process, all that sort of stuff. Also, I would just say, know that there are some questions that are asked where if you say, I don't have an experience of that, it might be a little bit of a red flag. So if somebody says, tell me about a time you've had a conflict at work, and you say, I've never had a conflict at work, then either you've never had a job or are not being truthful. Just know that a little bit. I've asked that before to somebody who said, like, I've never had a conflict at work. And I was like, I'm not sure that this is going to work out. Yeah, hypothetical approaches can definitely work.
Okay. So I'll move on to another question. How detailed should my answers be? How do I know if I'm saying too much or not enough?
I might jump in on this one. So part of it depends on the context. So if you are applying for a position that is inside of your organization and the panel members are people who are sort of in the same field that you've been working in, but maybe you're like applying for a promotion or a different team, then they already have a baseline understanding of the situation. So you don't need to explain to them, like, this is the role of the chief of the defense staff, and I was his speechwriter. But if you're applying to something that is external to your organization, you need to provide enough background context so that they can understand like why the thing that you were talking about matters. So if I'm talking about my potato crisis, I would give a little bit of detail that it was a really big deal for PEI's economy. There was a trade dispute with the United States, and there was also political tensions with the province. And that is enough to provide context for why my work was meaningful without me having to go into the value of trade of potatoes is $120 million per year and X, Y, and Z. So enough details to give context, put more weight on the action and the result.
She's frozen on
Yeah,
my
I think
end.
Lucy's frozen, so
Okay.
maybe we can go on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you think it's okay to move on? Oh, you're back. Okay, perfect. I'm going to move on to the next question. Thank you so much, Lucy. The next question, can I reuse, sorry, I moved. Can I reuse the same example for multiple questions, or should each answer be completely different?
I can jump in if everyone's want. So that one is tricky because you may have an example that is so intricate and very complex that from different slices of looking at it, you could probably have it for multiple competencies, which is acceptable. It's just not reframing it the exact same way. It's taking it from a different perspective. So if it's conflict resolution, but it's the same example, it's kind of similar to what Lucy said. It's about understanding your value, what you bring to the table. And sometimes when you have one example that has a lot of critical elements in it, for one question, you may be able to deep dive into 3 points, and that's enough. And then another way you'd say in the same example, these other three factors are now part of the equation. I didn't share it in the previous because it wasn't part of that competency. So I find being able to maybe journalize one of your bigger complex stories and dissecting it through the various key leadership competencies and having them ready in your brain, because reframing on the fly is a little bit stressful. So always look at your key leadership competencies, look at those big examples you may have, journalize them, and then break them apart. And maybe that's where AI could step in and help you break them into parts so that you are ready to respond in an articulate way.
Yeah, I was gonna say something similar, Jeremy. I would just add to really focus on listening to what they're actually asking you in the question, and that will help direct you on how you should answer it. And I think there was another question that was kind of similar to that in the Q&As, but yeah, that would be my response as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And I guess we'll move on to the next question. So the next question is, what if I get nervous and lose my train of thought during an answer?
I think it's entirely fair to say, hey, can I take 5 or 10 seconds to regroup? And it definitely happens. They're not in most interviews, unless they're evaluating like your effective communication or something, like they are not evaluating exactly how you say what you say. They're trying to get the content of your answer. So if you need 5 or 10 seconds to regroup and just say, hey, sorry, I think I'm just getting a little off track here. Can I just take 5 or 10 seconds to rethink my answer? That's totally okay to do. I will also say there are times where you might need accommodation in the selection process. So, like, for example, I'm dyslexic. So there have been times where I've asked for an accommodation for like a particular exam or something like that. You can know if that's something that you need in advance. Make that clear as part of a selection process. Because it might be that you have, test anxiety. It might be that you have something that requires some level of accommodation to be able to participate fully in a selection process. So figure that out in advance, and then if that's something that you need to request, then do so.
Just
Those are
want to share
great
another thought.
suggestions.
I was just going to share another thought just on kind of what Joshua was saying. So what I've done over the years and different processes is, because you have those mental models of what your story looks like, and you don't always know what the questions are going to be. Sometimes what I do is I have the question and I kind of break out my example in like 1 word bullets. So that keeps me like, okay, so this is the action. This is the thing I want to say in the action. That word is a trigger to remind me of what I was going to say if you lose train of thought. But like, Joshua said, it's really about making sure that, if you have to come back to a question, maybe you started on I've done this before. I started on a path of sharing my answer for 10 minutes and realizing I misinterpreted. So coming back to what Amanda said, misunderstanding the question, you can sometimes ask the question to be repeated, because sometimes that relieves a little bit of your anxiety if you misinterpret it and you think you don't have the answer. But hearing it out loud again does help you in keeping a bullet structure for each question and help you keep on path.
Yeah, I'll just add to that as well. There's sometimes where it's not super clear either. So you are definitely allowed to ask for it worded in another way as well. So if the question isn't super clear, make sure to pause and you can either restart your answer like Jeremy's done. I've for sure been there. And I've definitely asked for it another way of asking the question. So don't be shy.
Okay, thank you. And I'll go to the next question, which is, how can I talk about my impact if my role is more supportive and behind the scenes?
Okay, maybe I'll jump in. Your role being behind the scenes, I think it plays an integral role in the functioning of your team. So I think it's a matter of sort of breaking out exactly your tasks, and being able to, like, sometimes it's a matter of confidence of like elevating the your belief in your own contributions to the team. I'll give an example. We have a financial administrative lead on our team. She does spectacular work. She supports everything that we do, but she's not creating learning content. She's not doing the direct, sort of event management. But if she was not in her role and as amazing at her role as she is, we would have absolutely no accomplishments of our network. We would not be able to bill our 45 funding departments. We would not be able to process the 150 plus financial transactions, staff our 8 to 10 positions, and make sure that the network is functioning correctly. So she is also a recipient as part of the Fin team of the Public Service Award of Excellence, and properly recognized her contribution to that team. So I think about that in terms of like how you talk about your experience. Sometimes we diminish our experience in particular roles, and sometimes our managers diminish the value of our role in how they speak about us. So make sure that you are properly judging your own experience and able to speak to it.
I just want to add in
Okay.
something too, just to what Josh said too. It's just like,
Yep.
I think about me being a student, being a clerk, being a finance officer, being a director, like me as a person in public service, I am a servant to others. So my value is to show and demonstrate that you might not have the budget, you may not be managing the budget, but you are potentially the glue that keeps the team going. So you're the check-in, you're the person that's, writing the minutes, you're the person that's doing follow-ups on action items. Like those critical pieces, in my experience, are often the thing that lead to success. So it doesn't matter if you're a DM or if you're a mailroom clerk, if you're the one that's contributing to being the glue of the organization and keeping an eye on the ball and making sure the to-do lists are getting done, then you keep a kudos, just like Amanda shared. You might have to get those kudos. And even if others are diminishing you in your role, this is largely an individual thing. So regardless of what other people think of you, it comes back to your own value and your own perception of your value. So always make sure that I've heard tons of people work for me who are clerical managers, directors. And honestly, I find that people that are always trying to keep things moving forward, they diminish their own value, but I contribute to make sure that they know how much they contribute. And if you don't get that, always trying to find the phrases and words that show that you brought something to the table that no one else did.
I also want to hop on this love train here, and really emphasize the know your worth value. It's easy to get caught up in all of the things that are deliverables and everything. Speaking from someone who only recently joined the public service, I question for times whether my experience working in nonprofit was valid. And those are, I think for those, and I'm like creeping the Q&A to see how I can weave some of these answers into our questions, but all of your experiences are super valuable and valid. So if you're someone who volunteers in the community, very valid. Those are leadership skills. Those are, various like collaborative skills that you can talk about and use as examples within your interviews. So don't put yourself in a box and just think like, okay, I'm a project lead, I'm an assistant. Personally, I apply to things that I'm like, I probably have no business applying to, but it's gotten me some really cool opportunities and jobs because I put myself out there. So you never know who will see your worth. You just have to be able to confidently express express your worth. So
Perfect. Thank you. Those are all really good answers. I'll move on to the next question. So I sometimes struggle understanding the intention of the question that an interviewer asks. Therefore, I don't provide the right information that they are looking for. Is there a way to improve this? If it happens during the interview, what's the best way to ask for them to elaborate and I understand exactly which skills they're evaluating? And I don't know who would like to jump in.
So I can take the first go with this one. So I think first you sort of want to think about what are the key words that they are using, and specifically if there are any sort of um, the if there is an and or, right? Like if there is a have you done this or this, then it's okay to only sort of respond to one of those things. If it is an and, then make sure that you're responding to both of those things. If there's any sort of qualifiers around, recent or like a time limit of when you had this experience, like pay attention to those. In terms of the intent of the question, one, it's totally okay to ask for a sort of a clarifying question. I had one interview where I was given a situation and it's, how would you approach a speech with X organization? So before I started, I said, I'm not familiar with that organization in particular. I believe that they are outside of government. Is that correct? And they said yes. And I was like, okay, perfect. So then I can frame my response to how I would approach something that is out of government instead of inside government. So if there's anything that you're unsure of, ask the clarifying question up front. And yeah, just really try and pay attention to sort of any like the key words of the question about whether it's judgment or how you would manage a situation, something like you have two competing priorities. They want to understand, that's evaluating your ability to communicate. It's evaluating your judgment. It's evaluating your time management. So yeah, it's a little bit of it is practice of sort of understanding like the subtext of those questions. But when in doubt, if there's something that is phrased in an unclear way, ask for clarification. Ask them to repeat the question if you didn't catch all components, and maybe have like a pen and paper with you and sort of take down notes of the question as they're asking them so that you can refer back to it if there are multiple components.
I actually might jump in as well. So one part of that question is like just understanding which skills that they're evaluating. So something that I like to do anytime I've applied for jobs, I like to PDF the poster itself. And then later on, assuming I get an interview, I'm invited to the exam or the test, I am kind of prepared of what's going to be asked. Again, you can always find these resources on the GC Jobs website under archives, but I digress. Like basically what I do is I look at the competencies so I can assume that those are probably going to be assessed. So if I see communication, like verbal communication, I can assume that's going to be in the interview. And you can kind of maybe not necessarily make an assumption or kind of practice if this were to come up in the interview. So then you kind of have an idea of what could be asked, not necessarily for the question, but it kind of talks about those skills. So. And I don't know if anybody else want to jump in. Looks like
I,
Jeremy.
yeah, I like what Sarah said and others as well. And it's very true. This is the most complicated part of any interview, is mapping what you think the question is and what it's assessing to your experience. And this is where thinking on your feet is very complicated. And this is why rehearsing and having answers ready to go at any given moment. I've sat in interviews and had 3 examples ready to go just in case. And then you're on the spot thinking about what that answer is going to be. And I might be dating myself, but when the old days, you used to get a poster. By the time you got screened in and you got like the updated, you're invited to an interview or do an assessment, they used to put this is assessing, mobilizing people. But if they don't give that, what I used to do is take the poster, just like Sarah said, and I would actually put what I think they're going to assess in that particular part of the process. So if it's like the prepping, doing the screening, all the screening questions, are you going through and thinking, okay, this is about mobilizing people, innovation, and then you're at the testing phase, like, okay, so it's communication, it's written, so you can do that. And that's the interview stage where you don't know the answers. You have to look at the gap of the posters. Like, this is what they're looking for in the experience. This is what we're going to look for in the asset qualifications. And the asset qualifications where you start making guesses into what your interview could look like. And as you do more and more interviews, you'll get better at discerning that. But in the early stages, it's a lot of investigative work, but the key leadership competencies is really where you need to start, and looking at the full poster to see where they're going to assess each of those. They can assess mobilizing people in all three sections, but just be mindful that you have to really know the keywords that are, like Lucy said, keywords and competencies go hand in hand. If they're using a certain word in a briefing, it's communication. If it's leadership, it's like, how did you lead this? So those signals are what you're going to use to define your answer. And this is the hardest part, and this is why rehearsals is really critical.
Okay, thank you. So we're down to the last few minutes. So I'm going to bring up probably one last question, or one last? Okay. So the next question is actually about AI. So are there prompts that you recommend using to help using AI, sorry.
So I will say we're planning a session on exactly this to talk through the ABCs of what prompts to use in terms of sort of comparing your resume to a job poster or finding out if you're qualified. So we are working on that, but that will be delivered later in the spring. But use one of the tools in terms of interviews. Use one of the AI platforms to practice some interview questions. I was looking, I think Google has closed their interview specific function, but you can use ChatGPT, you can use Copilot to ask questions sort of back and forth and to sort of see your answers. It used to be back in the day, you would say like, do this with a friend, do this with a colleague, to sort of practice those interview questions, but make sure you get some practice at kind of telling your story, and that will lessen your stress during the interview process.
Go ahead, Jeremy. You're
Yeah, I was
quicker
just
than
gonna,
me.
yeah, it's just gonna kind of like say what Joshua said too is an amplifier. Like, AI could be used for AI. So you can ask it to give you the prompt. And you can also say your role is an assessor in the Canada Public Service. Here's the poster. Ask me some questions, and then go through the role of answering the questions. It may not give you the perfect scenario, but sometimes you can use AI to craft the perfect prompt for you to get you down the path. And sometimes you have to do it a few iterations, but the point is the collaboration. So you're learning as you're going along, and you're starting to figure out how you're going to frame your answers. I learn sometimes that, like, AI will find some of my blind spots in because I assume a lot. Just like when, Lucy answered the question before, is like, when you don't have enough background information, the gap falls, and if the AI can't figure it out, then the assessors won't. So it's great to always use the tool for its own benefit to improve your situation, but also to give you the prompt that would help you better.
Perfect, thank you. So I guess we're going to wrap up the Q&A session. So everybody today has been a wealth of knowledge. I know that I learned a lot and I really enjoyed this session. So I just wanted to remind everybody that this recording will be saved to the Fin YouTube page, or also to flag that there is a podcast that if you'd like to check that out. So if you want to know any more, check out CBC 2025 Wiki resource page. And we're going to actually finish off with one more polling question. So we just kind of want to know, did this workshop meet your needs? And I don't know if it's popped up yet. Okay, it's popped up. So basically the response is yes, no, and I don't know. So we are not going to be sharing the results of that today, but we just want to thank everybody for joining us. Again, as mentioned, all of the resources will be saved to the wiki page. There's also going to be an email that's going to follow this session. So it's going to talk a little bit about the programming, especially the in-person learning days that will be taking place in 25 cities across Canada. So that will be taking place between the spring and the fall. So again, thank you so much for everyone for joining us today.